Hello, I'm Dr. Max Gowland from Prime 50. I'm the founder of the company and also the founder of Dr. Max Health. I'm asked a question by a lot of people why the over 50s do need a supplement. Is that really true? Well, certainly my belief is yes, it is. And it's based on real data, real scientific data, published over many years by Public Health England, the result of many diet and nutrition surveys, which shows that the over 50s are actually quite deficient in many vitamins and many minerals, all of which are required for a whole list of general health areas. So let's have a look. A long time ago, I actually worked in sports nutrition. And it was when I was in that sports nutrition company, I started to think about my age, the over 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And a lot of people say, well, surely we're just older versions of 25. Well, we're not really, unfortunately. There are a whole range of reasons that we're actually quite different. We lose bone density. We're unfortunately much more prone to cancers. We lose muscle, and that's what I'm going to talk about over the next couple of minutes. A lot of people, huge number of people, have hypertension, high blood pressure, fatty liver. We have a lower immunity as we age. We don't absorb nutrients particularly well, like B12. A lot of people have type 2 diabetes, and it goes on and on. So older adults are actually quite different to the average 25-year-old. We actually interviewed over 1,000 over 50, 60, 70s, and 80s. And what they told us was, look, as I age, I just want to stay active, stay mobile, independent, just keep doing the things I love doing, play with the grandkids, walking, going on holiday, and so on. And we generally put together an insight of the over 50. We all grow older. I've got no problem with that. I look forward to the years I've got ahead, holidays, adventures, etc. But I still feel young, and I do more now than I've ever done before. I just don't want my body to slow me down. So, with the right lifestyle, I hope I can keep myself in a state that allows me to do all the things I want to do for many years to come. And that's really what it's all about as we age. Um, some of you may have heard health span versus lifespan. If you look at the top arrow, that is typical normal aging. An arrow which has an average age of around 79, 80, a little bit older for ladies compared to gents. Optimal longevity, of course, would be to extend that by a few years, maybe many years. But the important thing is to actually live those years as healthy as possible. In other words, have a much bigger green area, which is the area showing people who are living healthily without a major disability or chronic disease. So, what do we need to stay active? Because staying active is probably the single most important thing which will help us age well. So we look after our muscles, first of all. We need to look after our joints and our bones. We'll talk about that later. But today I just wanted to briefly discuss muscle health because that is probably one of the most important things we can look after as we age. So this is inside a pair of legs. This is a cross section of somebody's thighs, a typical young person, a young adult. You can see the bone in the middle, the little white circle. You can see the dark area, which is pure muscle mass. And then there's a thin layer of fat mass, which is, I suppose, skin in reality. That is a typical 63-year-old. Another MRI scan here. You can see a massive reduction in muscle. You can see a lot of fat, which has started to ingress the muscle. And that is not particularly healthy. It's called sarcopenia, which is age-related loss of muscle. The thing is, we can actually avoid that in many ways by staying active. If you look at the MRI scan of a typical 74-year-old who's actually not been that active throughout his whole life, there's a huge loss of muscle mass there. You could see a similar age person who's been a runner, a triathlete all his life. You can see his muscle is in fantastic condition. So he's not suffered any sarcopenia whatsoever. So generally speaking, you can fight against muscle loss. Here's another experiment which really demonstrates what can happen when you are sedentary. There was an experiment done here by a very famous professor, Professor Paddon Jones, where he took youngish people, put them into a pretend hospital situation, what's called a metabolic ward, lay them down for literally 28 days, and measured the loss of muscle mass. They were not allowed to move apart from to go to the toilet. They lost about 400 grams of muscle mass over a month. That's a lot of muscle. But he repeated the experiment with middle-aged people, on average 52 years old. They lost over 1.1 kilograms, nearly 1.2 kilograms in just 10 days. And a further experiment showed that older patients, older adults, lost about a kilo of muscle in just 3 days. So as you age, you lose more and more muscle mass faster and faster. And that really is potentially an entry into frailty far too early in life if you're not careful. So trying to avoid being sedentary is so important. So in summary, the facts: age-related muscle loss. Older adults do lose muscle very fast, a lot faster than younger people, especially when they're sedentary. On average, we lose after the age of about 45, about 1 or 2% loss of muscle every single year. Unfortunately, that does accelerate further as we age. So on average, that means that by the time we're only 65, which is quite young these days, a quarter of our muscle mass has gone, and it's very difficult to actually get that back at that age. Also, older adults do have what's called an anabolic resistance. We're not very good at maintaining or building new muscle as we age, and there are lots of theories and mechanisms for why that is. And we know that low muscle mass leads to slower metabolism and also less disposal of sugar. Muscle is a great disposal reservoir for sugar, and we do not want lots of sugar floating around in our blood for obvious reasons. Also, increased oxidative stress and inflammation causes a loss of muscle too. We know as we age, we have a lot more inflammation in our bodies. Unfortunately, muscle weakness, which is related to muscle mass, of course, is the number one risk factor for falls and fractures. And we do not want to fracture our hip as we age. There's a lot of data published in various musculoskeletal journals, which show very clearly that about 27% of people who have had a fracture, a hip fracture at that older age, die within 1 year, which is really quite a frightening statistic. So we really do need to be as strong as possible, stay active, stay mobile, and to avoid those fractures. And we know that joint instability and strain on the joints is caused by a lack of muscle as well. And other connective tissues like tendons and ligaments can also suffer. And basically, low muscle mass is related to institutionalization and also a higher mortality rate. So maintaining that muscle mass is so important as we age. And finally, this is a lovely graph which shows what can happen and what we can avoid. So we've got age along the bottom, and the vertical axis, we've got muscle mass and strength. And you can see if you look at the top line, as we enter adult life, it starts to decline, and older life, it continues to decline. If you look at the curve below it, similar sort of mechanisms, but those people have perhaps not eaten enough protein through their diet, because protein is required by muscle to build new muscle. And they've certainly been sedentary throughout their life. So they basically age a lot faster, they lose muscle mass, and they basically go through what's called a disability threshold. They become, if you like, more disabled a lot earlier in life, a lot more frail earlier in life. And this can all be avoided by simply staying active, perhaps do some resistance exercise, and eat enough protein. I hope you found that useful.